Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how are you?
I'm doing well, Bryce. How are you?
Really good. It's been a busy. Well, first of all, thank you for setting up today's recording because I know you've been like super busy making like the media rounds lately.
When it rains, it pours.
Yeah, you were interviewed by Lauren Hunter on Sonic,
Yep.
and you also were a guest on the podcast called Something Offbeat. How did that go?
I think it went well. It was a lot of fun to do. They are a podcast out of the States that kind of looks behind the headlines of some cool news stories. And they come across a story about a book in Massachusetts that was returned, I think, 119 years after it was checked out.
Wow.
And so they wanted to talk to a library. And so I assume they Googled library overdue fines something and found us because of the name of the podcast, which they loved. Yeah, so I just had was talking with them about how frequently things like that happen, which is not very often. And do we want the people to return books, and why don't people return books? And it was just a very fun conversation.
Nice. Yeah, I saw that request for an interview come in, and I was so glad that you were able to do that. And I haven't listened to the episode as of we're recording this, but yeah, if it's out by the time you hear this, I think it will be. We'll include a link to it in our show notes, so you can hear Caroline as a guest on a different podcast. So
And the Sonic interview was a lot of fun. It was for National Book Lovers Day, and I had the opportunity to talk about one of my favorite items at EPL, which is in the North of 52 collection, the edition of Archie Spectacular Presents Betty and Veronica, where they go to the West Edmonton Mall and
oh,
Klondike Days.
that's awesome.
So I think Lauren was really surprised to hear that we had that in our collection, but pretty excited.
Nice. Well, I'm sure there'll be a big uptake and holds on it now. So yeah, that sounds really good. But today, though, Caroline, this is actually a really big time of the year. With we're here at the end of August. Kids are getting ready to go back to school. There's so much excitement and nervousness, and when we're kind of talking about different episode ideas, it kind of made us think about a little bit about what it was like when we were in school, and some of the assignments that we ended up having to do. And one of those things that all kids eventually have to do when they're in school is kind of do that dreaded book report, right?
Yeah, I was trying to think. I maybe my school, I don't know that we did book reports so much as we all studied the same novel. Maybe I just blocked out the actual reports.
Yeah, I definitely remember doing some reports for sure after having to read a book. But and I mean, some of the books we had to read in school were great, others not so much. But today we thought it would be really fun to take a look back at some of those books that we read in school when we were kids. So this is a topic I'm surprised we haven't covered before on the show. But after 141 episodes, I'm glad we're finally able to talk about it. And today, actually, we have a first time guest joining us, Caroline. I love having first time guests. We love returning guests, but first time guests are always awesome. She is the manager of our Jasper Place branch, Madeline Gormley. Madeline, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I am doing great today.
Nice. So Jasper Place branch, what's the best part about working out of that branch?
It's a beautiful building, but I think the best part is we have just a lot of regular customers who come in, and it's always so joyful to see everybody every day, and it's just a wonderful place to work.
And Madeline, you're involved with EPL's Summer Starts at EPL program. So this has been a busy time of year for you.
Yeah, it's been very busy, but exciting also, we had, I think it's over 17,000 kids registered, which is the most for a couple of years. So that's very exciting. And it's so much fun to see all of the kids coming in and doing all of the events and all the crafts and all of the reading. It's just very fun.
So first of all, I'm very happy that you're able to join us today, mostly because I don't know if you listen to the show on a regular basis or not, but not that we've taken knocks at the Summer Starts the Kids Reading Club at all, but we occasionally will kind of say, like, we've been promoting the adult summer reading club, Summer Read, so we've been like, why should kids get to have all the fun and have their own summer reading club? I think it's time for adults to have their own. So hope you don't mind the online beef that we've kind of reluctantly started with you.
It doesn't sound super reluctant based on what you just said, but yeah, I mean, Summer Reading Club is for everybody, and I encourage everyone to win as many prizes in their life as possible. So take every opportunity you can.
And to be fair, we're not saying that kids shouldn't have any fun.
Yes.
That's an important distinction. Just that adults can also have fun in their life.
Oh, that's important for us all to remember, I think, as three adults sitting here.
All right. So before we get into our Overdue Finds picks, Caroline, I've got a question for you. This does not have to do with summer reads,
Okay.
but I think I know the answer. Do you believe in the power of literacy to shape brighter futures?
Yes, that was an easy one.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Well, listen up, because we're thrilled to invite everyone to a one-of-a-kind event that's all about making a difference through words and stories. After 4 long years, we're bringing back the EPL Fundraising Gala. This year's event will take place at the Westin Hotel on October 20th, and trust me when I say this isn't your ordinary gathering. Get ready for an evening filled with laughter, camaraderie, and of course some delicious treats that will delight your taste buds. We've got surprises up our sleeves that will keep you engaged and entertained throughout the event. And speaking of entertainment, we have quite the keynote signed up. So you likely know him from his incomparable performance as Dwight Schrute from the award-winning series The Office. Actor and comedian Rainn Wilson. He's going to be the keynote. So this is your chance to be part of something meaningful, as all proceeds go to support Ready, Set, Read, our early literacy program that's making a positive impact. So here's what you need to do. Head over to epl.ca/gala to learn more about the event, grab all the details, and secure your spot. So whether you're a dedicated library supporter, a book aficionado, or maybe just someone who believes in the power of education, this is your invitation to make a difference. So visit epl.ca/gala. And Caroline, I think, we announced that. I think it might be a good time to also let our loyal listeners know that coming up on a future episode of Overdue Finds, we actually get to speak to Rainn Wilson. I'm so excited about this.
This is so exciting. I cannot wait. I'm so nervous and excited, and I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, me too. I've doing a lot of research, so we won't just be asking him about The Office. And
I was going to say,
great.
Is your research just watching The Office all day?
Well, that too, mostly, but it'll be good. Okay, so let's share, before we get talking about some of the books we read in school, let's share some of our own overdue finds that we've been enjoying since the last episode. Madeline, of course, I'm going to start with you. Is there something that you can recommend for listeners to check out?
Maybe it's an old rec, but I'm watching it for the first time. It's the Good Omens television adaptation. I'm currently watching season 1, and it's excellent. It reminded me, this is a book that I read not as part of school, but under my desk while I was meant to be in school. I read
That's
that
a
book.
whole different podcast.
It's a whole other, that's a whole other situation. But it reminded me of that. So of course I immediately went to put a hold on it, and there's a big long line. But the show is really good. It's on Prime and available in our collection.
When that show first came out, it seemed like such like a perfect like library like show to watch, especially obviously it's, based on the Neil Gaiman book, and he's always very popular. Yeah, I remember when I saw the trailer for it, I was just like, oh man, this is going to be really popular.
When you're reading the book, it creates like a really clear vision of what's going on. You have these really clear mental pictures, and the show is not matching up at all with what my mental pictures were, but I still like them. So that to me is a good adaptation.
Yeah, exactly. Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
I have a book that I wanted to talk about, and this is The Family Plot by Megan Collins. Uh, Dahlia Lighthouse was raised on an isolated island with her siblings, and her parents were obsessed with true crime and serial killers. Now she's 26, and for the last 10 years, she's been searching for her missing twin brother. After her father's death, she returns home for the memorial and reunites with her mother, other brother, and sister. But things take a turn when they discover that her father's grave already has someone in it.
Ooh,
Oh my.
So
mysterious.
yeah, the book came out in 2021. Megan Collins has a more recent book that's coming out that just came out this year, and I was putting that on hold, and then I thought, well, I'm just going to see what else she has, and came across The Family Plot. It took me a while to get into it. The first
Mm.
part, where it kind of just jumps in, and you're not sure who the characters are yet, or why there's so much drama and who these people are. But then once it clicked, I just could not put it down. And it really kind of had this like air that kind of hung around me, almost like a chill with it. It's a very atmospheric book, and I think I was feeling that while reading it. So, yeah, for mysteries, kind of character based mysteries, as well as some critiques on the true crime, the way that people portray true crime in, you know, pop culture or media, and what that can look like. Lots of interesting points in this book that come up.
Nice. It sounds really good, especially as we head into the fall. It sounds like a good, like, maybe it's not as nice outside and you're kind of staying in and kind of
Yeah.
curling up on the couch to read a book. Yeah, that part about true crime is always interesting. We've talked obviously a lot about true crime on the show, when we interviewed John Douglas, obviously. And yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's something that, like, I don't know. I guess I would say, like, I would maybe I am a fan, I guess, of true crime, but it's one of those weird things where it's like, it's interesting to hear about, but yeah, once you start to, obviously thinking about, unfortunately, there's victims in these stories and all this stuff. It's very kind of a complex subject if you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. And the Dahlia, her sister, uh, Tate, they're all named after serial like true crime victims.
Oh
She
wow,
is like the Black Dahlia murders, and her sister after Sharon Tate. And Tate has grown up to make these like art dioramas of murder scenes that have a following on Instagram. And this sounds like awful to be saying this, but I also could not guarantee that I wouldn't follow that account if it was real.
exactly.
You know,
I
and
I would. I'll admit it.
and just like the detail, and then so there's this thing around like this crime as art and experience, but yeah, and then they've grown up on this isolated island in this big mansion, and like everyone on the island thinks their family is super weird, and they don't know the half of it. So yeah, lots going on in this book.
Wow, it sounds really good though.
Yeah, I
I'll
enjoyed
have
it.
to check that out.
Yeah. So what have you been enjoying, Bryce?
Well, recently there was a story in the news. There was a man, I believe he was in Ontario. He was into Magic the Gathering cards, and he pulled this card out of this box that he got, and it was like the One Ring card. So Lord of the Rings, Magic the Gathering only produced one of these cards. It was like a one of one, very limited edition. Everybody in the world was searching for this ring card. And of course, he pulls it. And there's a story in the news about musician Post Malone actually ended up buying the card off this person for $2.6 million. It was crazy. But it kind of got me thinking about, card collecting. And, when I was a kid, I was really into hockey cards and baseball cards. And just recently, probably within the last year, I've started to kind of get back into it and, trying to collect some of my favorite players. So my recommendation today actually is a documentary which you can watch on Canopy called Behind the Card. So card collecting right now is absolutely huge. And, if you've ever kind of wondered why, or maybe you just want to learn more about it, I recommend checking out the documentary. So the documentary itself looks back at how kind of the industry in the early 90s, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, when I really started getting into collecting hockey cards, it takes a look at kind of that time period, because there was this huge boom in kids collecting all kinds of cards. I even collected like Marvel cards and a bunch of stuff during that time. But eventually that kind of bubble burst, and a lot of it had to do with a lot of these companies would be printing millions upon millions of cards to meet the demand. And the problem with that, of course, is a lot of people are holding onto these cards thinking they're worth money, whereas they're essentially worthless now. But the industry is seeing a big boom right now. It kind of happened during the pandemic. A lot of people were at home and were looking for something to do. But the documentary kind of talks about kind of how the industry went bust in the mid 90s, and now kind of it's being rejuvenated. And basically, thanks to things like Pokemon cards, a lot of these card companies now, they're kind of learning from their mistakes in the past and not printing millions upon millions of cards. So there's some, like, for example, some baseball cards where you could pull they're autographed by players and maybe they only produced one of them, and a few things like that. So if you ever kind of wondered about, like, why are these cards so popular, or just kind of about the card industry in general, check out Behind the Card. Maybe your kids are into Pokemon cards and you're just like, I don't get this. Check it out. I thought it was really interesting as somebody who myself is kind of dipping my toe back into the card collecting world.
Wow, when you first were describing this one card situation, it was giving me Charlie and the Chocolate Factory vibes
Oh,
Me
of
yeah.
too.
it, and then I started thinking about like what if it was some kind of like remake where Post Malone is the Willy Wonka figure?
Yeah.
Someone should take that idea down.
I like it. But it's interesting though. Like, I follow quite a few like card companies and collectors on Twitter. And when this person pulled this card and they showed it on social media, like, it absolutely blew up. And it was totally like that scene in, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory where Charlie gets that last ticket. It's like, oh my God, it's been found. A lot of people disappointed, a lot of people excited. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. All right. So today's topic, of course, books you read in school. But before we get talking about kind of books, let's discuss school more broadly. Kids are going back to school this week when you're hearing this episode. Madeline, what did you think of English class? And did you like doing novel studies?
I liked English class a lot. I think partially because it was my strongest class, so that always like leads you in a certain direction. But I enjoyed it. I liked doing novel studies for the most part. I think often the ones I remember best were later on, and I got to do them by myself. And you got to kind of like pick your book later on. But I always liked doing novel studies in English class, even when I was in elementary school.
So, like, and I've been curious about this with obviously a lot of librarians. I assume you read a lot as a kid as well. So even outside of school, books you didn't necessarily have to read.
Yeah, I was a big reader. I read weird things though. Like I got kind of into John Grisham at like an early age, and but yes, I was a big reader. I mentioned this already, but I was a big like reader under the desk. So whatever novel everybody else was reading, I might have already read that, but I was, involved in the Pelican Brief or something instead.
Picture like 9-year-old Madeline grabbing that copy of Pelican Brief and checking that out.
Yeah, my parents just had like a wide range of books in the house, and then we just could pick and choose whatever we wanted. And then occasionally you'd get something that you didn't understand, and you just like, and move on. Or you would read it, not understand it, and then years later be like, maybe I would have understood it better now
Yeah.
instead of then.
Caroline, how about you? What did you think of English class? I assume you were a big fan?
I loved it. Yeah, it was good. It was reading and writing was part of it. So I was always like big into creative writing. I would write a lot. Kind of long-winded when it comes to that. So I remember like if they were putting them up on the wall, like most people would have like a story that was like a page or so, and then mine had like five just all stapled together on it. And I liked English class. I love reading and was doing a lot of like reading outside of school, series, books, nonfiction I've talked about. I would just, we had Kyle Marshall on the show, and he talked about like reading atlases as a child. And I was the same way. Like a good chart was fascinating to me. So, uh, and then in English class, I liked it. I did well in school. I liked school for the most part. My least favorite classes were the ones that are like other people's favorites, like gym and art. And so I was just kind of getting by on those ones. But yeah, I liked it. I think there was I was a strong reader, and so there was sometimes, when you have a group of 20 to 30 kids doing anything together, there are going to be, you know, you're doing it so that the majority can kind of follow along. And so wasn't always I wanted to read ahead, or it wasn't a book I was enjoying. But yeah, when I could choose a bit more, or the books got a bit longer, that was pretty great. Yeah. What about you, Bryce?
I actually liked English class. So English and social studies were kind of like my go-to, like guaranteed I'm going to get a good grade in these classes. Science and math, was terrible at, were always my worst marks for sure. But depending on the book, actually, I didn't mind doing some novel studies. Spoiler alert, I enjoyed the ones the most that did have a movie with them. No big shock there. But there was a movie with it. I was like, okay, I think I got this. In fact, I remember one assignment, I think it was in maybe 10th grade English. We got to pick our own book, which was awesome, but we had to do a report on it also had to have a movie as well. So we had to like do a report kind of on the book, but talk about the differences between them. And mine was Born on the 4th of July by Ron Kovic, the Vietnam. He was, of course, a Vietnam veteran, came back and kind of tried to talk about America's involvement in the war and how it's a bad thing. So anyway, that was grade 10. That's what my report was on anyway. But yeah, anything where there's a movie, I'm like, okay, I got this. I can do it.
I think teacher. I mean, I'm not a teacher. I've never been in. I was gonna say I've never been in a classroom, but I have. That's the whole point of today. But I've never been a teacher. But I do think teachers also liked when there was a movie for it, because that was another way of engaging
Mhm.
kids and showing the class the movie and getting into it.
I did do teacher school, so I can confirm that it is handy to have a movie also.
You're like, this will lead up a couple days in class as we slowly
Yeah,
watch this.
Sometimes at the end of class, no one has a lot left to say. It's good to have 10 minutes. Got a
Yeah.
movie to watch.
Yeah. And I imagine too, then you're also like hero of the day when you wheel in that TV and VCR when in my day combo into the classroom and actually get to show it.
Speaking of books that have movies, Madeline, when I asked you about being a guest on this episode, you said you'd be on it, quote, only if I can monopolize the conversation about the outsiders, end quote. Start us off with your outsiders hot takes.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this because that was my initial reaction when you told me what the
Yes.
topic was. But then I was like, do I have any hot takes? It's just the book from school that I remember the most clearly. Like I have a really clear memory of getting the book from our teacher, and then I read it that day. Like I finished it. I went home and I read the whole book. And that is the one time I've read The Outsiders. I've never read it again. I just read it that one time and then I coasted for the next like 8 weeks in school. But I still have these visceral memories of some of the scenes in the book. And I think it was the first like really adult theme novel where I really kind of could relate to what was going on. And so I think that's why it had such an impact on me, and reading through it. And I was really into Grease before then, so I
Yeah.
kind of thought it was going to be like the movie Grease, like that, and then it was just more like real life. And I was like, whoa, what is happening? Um, but I still love that book, and it does have a movie, but I've never seen it.
The cast is pretty great. This is our second Tom Cruise movie reference of the episode. Tom Cruise is in it. Um,
Patrick
uh,
Swayze,
Patrick Swayze,
Yeah.
Rob Lowe, Emilio Estevez, Matt Dillon,
yeah.
Ralph Macchio.
C. Thomas Howell plays Ponyboy. So yeah, and directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
That's right. Yeah. It was
Yeah,
a big movie in the day.
yeah,
Yeah, it's funny. I've never actually read the book before. I know it's been kind of referenced on the show, and it seems
yeah.
like a lot of kids did, kind of were required to read it in school. For some reason, we were not required to read it at all. But I've seen the movie. I like the movie, but I've never read the book. But Caroline, I know you're a big fan, right?
Yeah, it came up in our top five books
Yes.
Yeah.
episode,
Hmm.
and I've described it as I think of it as like my first book crush, where I like had read other books before that I liked, obviously, but this one, like I read it and it felt a little exciting, it felt a little new. I, kept thinking about it. I went and bought it, which growing up in a place without a bookstore was a big deal. So to actually go and get it, it I don't quite know what it is about The Outsiders where I'm looking back and just kind of like, really, that was it. But I look back fondly at it.
Yeah. It's an immersive book. Like you just feel part of the world and you attach such, like you just feel so strongly about the whole thing. And it was also, at the time when I read it, it has that like the first line of the book is the same as the last line of the book. And I was like, oh my God. Like I thought that was like the most brilliant thing I had ever encountered up to that point. I was like, like it just kind of blew my mind. And then at some point later on, I learned, she's 16 when she
Yeah.
wrote like all of, I was like, oh, I could write a book like I never did. But that's something that maybe I could do. And it felt like such a real book with all these adult themes and really serious.
Yeah.
And it totally like you belonged to that world in the time that you were reading it. And most people I know did kind of read it like I did. Like you just kind of start it and then you just like keep going through. Um, and it's just a wonderful book. I really think fondly of it.
A lot of people, it seems like they did discover it when they're younger. Was it, do either of you know, like, was it originally kind of released as kind of like a YA type book, or was it kind of more geared towards just the general reading public as more fiction?
It was a YA release. It was part of kind of that growing targeted publishing at that age group, and the fact that S.E. Hinton was, as you say, 16 when she wrote it, like that kind of tied into uh, how it was it wasn't like by kids for kids, like it wasn't like that, but it was like this is someone who knows. This is an authentic voice around it. And yeah, it was kind of marketed at that growing teen age group, which I think makes a lot of sense with just the characters in it. Like there's, I think there's so few parents in the book. I think Two Bit's mom gets a mention, and other than that, they're on their own. And oh well, Johnny's father's abusive, so there's that. So it's these are not great portrayals. The parents aren't around. The teen boys and are on their own, looking out for each other in this world. And I think that the authenticity that came with someone kind of living in and seeing that world, and being that age without all of the perspective of it. Like there's a lot. There's a good, like, not everyone's just thinking of the perspective. I think some of the characters would come off a lot differently if it was written by an adult, for sure.
There's a scene in the book where the main character, Ponyboy, kind of realizes his older brother, who is his caregiver, really does love and care about him. And kind of throughout the story, Derry is this kind of cold figure, like paying the bills but not really involved other than that. And at the time, I think he's like in his early 20s, and at the time that seemed like totally ancient to me, 'cause I was maybe 13 when I read it. But I now realize that like it's reading it or like thinking about that as an adult, you think more about like the responsibility that that character had, and like when there is such a lack of like parents or responsible adults in these kids' lives, like what sacrifice that person made, and then the realization that like there was a lot of care there, but also a lot of stress. Like that has always stood out to me. It's a good book.
Yeah.
Well, clearly I've got some homework to do after we're done recording here today because, like I said, it's been years since I've watched the movie. I remember really liking it, but clearly I need to go actually read the book. So, yeah, you've both sold me on it. Caroline, you did before as well, but yeah, when we talked about this,
I'm here to reinforce
just
it.
that extra little bit, that extra push.
My favorite part was when you said, only if I can monopolize the conversation about the outsiders. I There was like, I didn't know which way you were gonna go. Like maybe you were gonna be like, this is my chance to like rant about this, and I was like, either way I'm in, because it just inspires these strong feelings.
I was kind of like refreshing my memory and then it always brings up other memories. And when you're reading, there's the other gang, the socials, but I just didn't realize how that was pronounced. So I read through it, and in my head, I pronounced it the socks the
Yes.
entire time. And unfortunately, that is what I said out loud in class one day. And like the person behind me, just devastating, was like, that's not how you pronounce it. And I just never spoke in class again, basically, from that moment. That was it for me.
Oh man, are we the same person? Because
Sometimes I think so.
my my teacher, so this was one I couldn't read ahead of it until
Yeah.
I bought the book, but that's because it was one where our teacher read it out loud to us. And
Oh.
so like we did this, and I was thinking after, like, maybe this was a plan by the school board so they didn't have to buy like 30 copies of a book if they just had the teacher read it out loud to us. So he would read the chapters and he pronounced it as sock. So like, well, the whole thing, like when they talk about like, oh, Cherry Valance, she's
Mhm.
the this rich girl, the South Side Socks, and I'm like, it was not until like much later when I was like, wait, I don't think that's right,
Yeah,
but I can't change it.
it was not clear to me, but I read it as socks to this day.
Yeah,
That's just, it seems normal to me.
yeah. And it doesn't, like, there's a lot already that, like, for me as a 13-year-old girl in rural Ontario reading or listening to this book, there was a lot already that I was like imagining in
Hmm.
terms of rumbles and switchblades and leather jackets and things like that. So to have a gang called the Sox wasn't that much. Like, I was already ready for it. So
So how's it spelled in the book then?
SOCS. But it's also very clear that it's short for
yeah,
socials.
it is
So
very
like
clear.
there's
Okay.
no question that the error is on my and Caroline's teacher's
Yeah,
part. Like it's
yeah.
All right. So now that we've thoroughly covered S.E. Hinton's most famous book, what are some other books that you read in school that stuck with you? Madeline, let's start with you.
the ones that came to mind are kind of tragic ones. So I thought immediately of Tuck Everlasting and Bridge to, oh my goodness, Terabithia,
Hmm.
Bridge to Terabithia, which I wonder if they kind of stand out in my mind because they are kind of both pretty sad at the
Yeah.
end. But I remember distinctly doing novel studies with the class for both of those, and the just everyone kind of getting to the sad parts at the same time, and some people not at all affected, some people devastated. And I kind of that was one of the first times where I saw like how emotional or how attached you could be and how people react to different stories in different ways. And I don't know that I thought super critically about it at that time, but it was the one of the times where I realized that people might not like the same things as me all of the time, or they might not react the same way as me. And that maybe is one of the reasons to do novel studies like that, where everybody's reading and talking about the same things. You kind of learn about like a diversity of perspectives on things. But those were the books that have stayed with me. And another book, which was not a novel study, but I had a teacher read Kit Pearson's When the Lights Go On Again in grade 4, and she read it, I think, over the course of the year almost. It was felt like a long book, but it was really immersive and kind of started. It was the first time where I liked a book, identified the author, and then read everything by that author. And she was really good at reading aloud. So I remembered that experience too.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back kind of on your school years and think of some of those books where it's like, yeah, the teacher just reads it to you and you sit there and hopefully you're engaged with it. But that's a lot of pressure on the teacher to keep a class of fourth graders kind of engaged while they're reading a book.
Yeah, I think there's a knack to it. I think now of audiobooks, like if I don't like the narrator within 5 minutes, I pretty much move on. Like I don't
Yeah.
worry about it. But I think that's like an elementary school teacher thing. Like you're good at read alouds. That's typically, something that you have going in, and being able to work with kids at that age. I think any opportunity you have to get kids interested in any form of reading, so like listening or any form of engaging with stories or just information, I think becomes so critical. Like that's the whole point of novel studies to me is like there's material and then the opportunity to talk about it. Like those are essential skills. And sometimes it's about the outsiders and like how dramatic it is and mispronouncing the word. But sometimes it's what sticks with you forever. But the point is that Caroline and I are still talking about this book
Yeah.
many years later. Like it makes an impression. And you might not read a ton outside of those novel studies, but at least you have the experience. So you know how to do that with other forms of media and information.
Definitely. Caroline, how about you? Besides The Outsiders, what are some of the other books that really stuck with you from when you were in school?
Um, I it it's funny because it didn't really stick with me. I could not tell you what the plot of it was, but I remember the experience of reading The Mummy, the Will, and the Crypt, which is by, I think it's by John Bellairs, and it was kind of like a mystery adventure book where some like kid was needed to solve a riddle. There was a mummy, a will, and a crypt, and like just lots of um action in the book. And I think what stood out to me, I think we read it in grade 5, and the year before I had been in a 4-5 split class. So I would overhear when the teacher was teaching this book to the grade 5s, like they would talk about, things that seemed like very exciting, and then like then I was in grade 5 and I got to read it and I was older and all of that. But yeah, now the only thing I remember, that's where I learned the word bouillon for like
Oh yeah,
bouillon cube.
yeah, cute, yeah.
Yeah, that I'm gonna have to go look that one up after the episode today. And then I think high school then would be the next area where I there were books that I really kind of got into. It's kind of a cliche, and there are many other books out there to read, but Great Gatsby was one that in high school English class, I just really enjoyed, and I read it not that long ago, and there was just some pieces of it that stood out that hadn't the first time I had read it. And it was when I used to teach a course here at EPL, and we talked about the Enneagram. We used like some fictional characters to like show who the different types are, and one Jay Gatsby is listed as an Enneagram type 3, which is kind of like the fake it till you make it type of like putting up that successful facade, and then like once you're living the role, the rest will come. And in the training I would get like really excited about this, and I'd be like, his books had pages that were uncut. They were uncut pages because he hadn't read them. And like people are like, when are we breaking for lunch, Caroline? And so but it was interesting to think of. I mean, none of the characters in that are really appealing at all. They're all pretty terrible, and I don't know, kind of interesting to see them through that lens of that like semi unreliable narrator. So yeah, I enjoy Great Gatsby.
Totally off. Well, kind of on topic, but off topic. Did you see the Family Guy spoof of The Great Gatsby?
Probably it's not coming back to me
It was
right
part of like a
now.
trilogy
Yeah.
episode where they cover classic novels. It's pretty funny, but also too for longtime listeners of the show, they know that Caroline, for years, and hopefully the fine people at the Walt Disney Corporation are listening. You've been pitching the idea of a Muppets
Yes.
version
Yeah.
of The Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
Let's make that happen.
I think that is what needs to happen. I it would be entirely Muppets with one human actor playing Gatsby. I don't know who it would be. I'm open to casting suggestions. So, yeah, just putting that out there in the world.
Let's make it happen, Disney.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's on your list, Bryce? What stood out for you?
A couple books really stood out to me. One was, did either of you have to read Lord of the Flies in school?
Yes.
No, but that was one of the books that I was on my parents' shelf. So I read it when I was in like grade 3 and was like, what is happening in this book? But I never did it in school.
I did it. I think we did it in grade 10.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I believe that's kind of when I read that book too in school, and I actually enjoyed it. It was funny because there was a lot of books, I'll talk about one here in our next segment that I didn't enjoy, but that one, I think maybe it was because I had watched, there's two movies. There's of course the original black and white version, and there was like an updated one. I think that came out in like 1990 or 1991. So I'd seen the movie before, so I kind of knew what it was about. I liked the movie. I did enjoy the book. So maybe it was because I'd seen the movie and I liked it, and it was probably a little bit easier for me to follow. But I've, over the years, I've heard people complain that they just don't like the book or whatever. And I think a lot of it has to do with people were maybe forced to read it in school, like we were. But I enjoyed Lord of the Flies. I thought it was a good book. The other one too that really stood out to me, and it was a book that I did enjoy, was 1984 by George Orwell. Did either of you have to read that one?
No.
No.
I know I read it in high school, but I don't think it was for a class.
Yeah, I don't know if it was grade 10 or grade 11 that had to read that book, but yeah, I thought it was fascinating, and I think it's definitely one of those books that, of course, just everything that's going on in the world today, it's sadly more relevant than ever, and it's definitely worth, I think, a read if you've never read it before. But funny story about that book, though. So we didn't have to do a report, but there was a test on 1984. And I remember, as a slow reader, I was enjoying the book, but I knew I wasn't going to be finished the book by the time we had to write the test. So I went to our local mom and pop video store down the street from where I lived, and I rented the movie starring John Hurt and watched it the night before I wrote the test. The movie's actually fairly, it's actually a really good adaptation, and it's quite faithful, actually, and helped me ace that test. So I took a gamble, and it paid off. So no, I don't, if you're a younger listener to this show and maybe you have to read 1984, I don't recommend doing what I did, but if you got to do it, it's pretty safe to do.
That seems like that could have been a website in like the early days of the internet
Mm-hmm.
around like, can you trust this movie?
Yeah.
Can I watch the movie instead of reading the book? We need a smaller title, a snappier title, but like, how faithful is the book? Can I get away with this?
Yes. Yeah, that was like early days of the internet. I don't even think we had a computer at home, but there was definitely no internet at that time. So
Yeah.
I was just, kids today are lucky. I was flying blind. You got your Wikipedias now and YouTubes and everything. It was tough. It was tough for us in the 90s.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot. After the test, you've seen the movie. Did you finish reading the book?
Yes, I eventually did. Yes. So I wasn't that far off from actually finishing it. I just knew that based on how slow I read that I wasn't going to be able to get it done in time. So I think I don't know how many pages I had left, but yeah, I did finish reading it. I think just so I would kind of feel better about okay, I did okay on this test.
You earned it.
I did.
Yeah. So not everyone is gonna love every book. Were there any books that were more of a struggle for you than maybe some of these other titles? Madeline?
I had to think about this because at first I thought, no, I think I liked all of them. But I now believe that I just choose not to remember them. I think I remember what I liked. And the other ones are just like lost to the sands of time. Like they're gone forever. But I remembered one, and it's because it's called The Pigman. Did either of
Mm.
you read that book? I
No.
only remembered the title, and I kind of vaguely remembered the plot. Like there's an older man and two teenagers, and they all become friends. And I remembered that part. I remembered not really enjoying reading it, and then that was kind of all I could pull up. And then so I read the Wikipedia page for it yesterday, and it's like an award-winning book that everybody loves. And when I read the summary, it sounds pretty good. So I'm interested in reading it again to see if I can change my memory of this book, because I was not at all I just wasn't interested in it at all. Maybe it's the one I did immediately after The Outsider, so maybe I was just like coming off a high and just
Yeah.
nothing could match it. And then later in high school, I never really liked doing like Shakespeare plays or anything like that. I always
Mhm.
really struggled with anything that wasn't using like really modern language. So we read the Odyssey as well, and those I just couldn't get. They weren't immersive enough to me. I don't know if there was a barrier with the form or maybe the language used. I'm not too certain. But I always liked the movies. So the story was always good, but it was hard for me to like sit down and read them.
Yeah.
So I was less engaged in those.
Yeah, same with me with Shakespeare. I remember we did, I think, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, but yeah, that was stuff where I was like, can we please move on from Shakespeare because this is awful.
I was going to say around that same time we did Of Mice and Men in grade 10, and I liked that book, but I was also um, involved, like I did a lot of piano and music kind of study outside of school. And at the same time, the Citadel put on an opera version, like an English opera version of Mice and Men. But Lenny still spoke like kind of with a country accent, but it was like in this opera kind of form, and we went to see it, and the my music teacher just like burst out laughing and then was like, oh my gosh, I'm so like it was. And I that's my clearest memory of Mice and Men is actually this opera version of it.
Of Mice and Men, by the way, was also in that Family Guy trilogy along with The Great Gatsby. So I don't remember which episode it is. We'll try and find it and put it in our show notes. It's also very funny, by the way.
Were they also doing books you read in school? Was that the common denominator? It's
I don't.
probably like great American novels or
Yeah,
something.
it was like American classics, and I think the other one was Huckleberry Finn, I believe,
Hmm,
was the first one.
yeah. Yeah, so Bryce, were there ones that you, other than Shakespeare?
I The only one that really stood out to me, besides Shakespeare that I didn't care for, was The Chrysalids by John Wyndham. Is I don't remember much about the book. I don't remember hardly anything about it. I just remember having to read it and just not enjoying it, like hating that book, and couldn't wait for us to move on to something else. But it was interesting though because like I looked up the plot of it last night when I was kind of doing up my notes for today's episode. And I was like, oh, actually, this book doesn't sound too bad. It's, takes place in the future. There's a nuclear war and it gets into themes of religion and stuff like that. So maybe that's where it kind of maybe lost me a little bit. But I just remember not not liking it at all. But I mean, today, if you look it up online, it's considered to be obviously a classic novel. I think it originally came out in the 50s, but it just wasn't for me at that age. Caroline, how about you?
My books, I put them on that shelf of not wasn't for me, because they're books that I know appealed to other readers, and people love and talk about them, maybe even the way that I talk about The Outsiders. But we read a lot of books about animals, and that was not, I didn't really get into them. So I know that we did The Incredible Journey, and I didn't hate it. It just wasn't for me, not my book. Um, the Grizzly, about a father and son who go on this like weekend bonding trip and run into a grizzly and it goes terribly wrong. That's the book where I learned the word gangrene. So
Oh.
Gangrene.
gangrene because the father's leg took a turn for the
Mm.
worst. And Where the Red Fern Grows was not my book. So I don't, we like to celebrate books. We like to talk about the stuff that's in our collection. These are there. I would love for someone reach out, email us podcast@epl.ca if you're a big fan of any of those. I'd love to hear what other people took away from them, but yeah, not what grabbed me.
Caroline, I'm not going to lie to you. Grizzly sounds kind of awesome.
I do wonder if I read it now, if I could just kind of let go a little more. But yeah, I was looking up. It's a 1964 novel, um, published by or written by Annabelle and Edgar Johnson. And yeah, it's about a teen boy. He lives with his mom. His dad is estranged. He wants to do something on the weekend, but his mom's like, "No, you're going camping with your father." So they go out, they go camping, they try to like rebuild connections. It does not go well. Then this grizzly appears and attacks them. The father's injured. The son is also injured too, I think. And then they have to like get back to safety. Yeah. So it's a book for someone, not me.
Sounds like, honestly, though, it does sound like something probably, if I had to read it in school when I was a kid, it sounds like something I probably would have enjoyed. But, yeah, might have to check that one out.
I'm just checking. I don't know if there's a movie, but it could have. Like I could see it being like a 1970s TV movie
Hmm.
type thing.
There is and I'd be shocked if it's based on the same book. There is like a horror movie, I think, from the late 70s. I believe it's called Grizzly. Um, no idea if it's based on this book at all, but I can picture the VHS cover of it right now in my head.
Yeah. So I mean it yeah, I don't know. It's been out of print for a while. So but it comes back in and out. I'm looking now on the Wikipedia page and says the title was reprinted in 1995 with new reading questions for Canadian students. That would
Hmm.
be about the time that I read it. So maybe this was like the hot book in teaching circles
Yeah.
in at that time.
The school district got a big discount on it, and
Yeah.
everybody's reading it.
Yeah. So yeah, let's go into our roundtable questions. Uh, we talked a little bit about school before. Uh, Aside from maybe English, what was your favorite class in school, Madeline?
I mostly liked hanging out with people at school, so it's hard to identify a favorite class. I think any of the classes that had more conversation. So like science wasn't so much, math wasn't so much for me because it was a lot of kind of like sitting and just learning a skill. But I really liked social studies and classes with like conversation were more my thing in school.
Yeah. Bryce, you mentioned social studies was your jam.
Yeah, I really liked anything history related, but probably if I had to name my favorite, no big shock, I would go with probably phys ed or, believe it or not, drama. I enjoyed drama in junior high and high school. It was fun. Did a lot of improv and everything, so it was good. How about you, Caroline?
History. I would go with history. I gym involves a lot of like the recurring dreams I
Mm,
have, but it's usually around like I don't know if I have my gym clothes with
Mm.
me,
mm.
if they're in there. But yeah, a surprising number of my dreams take place in my elementary school gym. So there you go. Um, Next question. What is one book you think people should read in school? Madeline.
I really kind of struggled to like come up with like the one book that I thought everyone should read because like a little bit of it is you have to see like a full spectrum to like have that personal opinion to kind of know what to read. It was hard to think of like what I thought everyone should dive into. I mean, The Outsiders is like my obvious answer. I think everyone should go into it. But I think the most valuable novel study I did, even though it's not like my favorite book now, it was in grade 12. We had to pick our own, and it's similar to yours, Bryce. It didn't have to be a movie, but it was the first time you had to find like you had to research, you had to like find other articles about it, and the one I picked was Life of Pi, which was a good book. I really liked it at the time, and it you had to do a poster, you had to do all of these things, but the act of going in and choosing my own, and you got to pick your own themes and that sort of thing, um, was what I liked the most about it. So that is an absolute non-answer where I commit to nothing, but I think like the most I got out of it was picking your own, engaging with it, and whether you liked it or not, you still kind of did the same type of work and did your presentation.
Yeah. Bryce, what do you think?
So this was a book, actually. I was telling you kind of before we started recording today. There was a book I remember. It wasn't until I got to this question in our outline, I was like, oh yeah, we did read that book. That's The Diary of Anne Frank. So that would be my
Mm,
pick for one that probably everybody at some point should read. I don't remember which grade I was in when we actually read it. I probably want to say maybe junior high, like grade 7, grade 8. But especially today with so much, unfortunately, so much the rise of hate in the world. yeah, it's just, to me, it's a very important book. And I remember a few years ago, Cheryl and I we were in Amsterdam and we went to the Anne Frank house. Just very powerful. And you actually get to go into the attic where they hid and everything. So if you ever ever in Amsterdam, definitely go check it out. It's definitely something I'll never forget. But yeah, I think everybody should read that book. Caroline?
Yeah, I went with Seven Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. When
Mm.
we had, it's a newer book, but really kind of reflecting uh, stories that have not been explored. It's a nonfiction book, which I think is also interesting. I don't remember doing a lot of nonfiction in school, talking about them. And yeah, when we spoke with Tanya Talaga on the show here, we talked a little bit about what it means for her to have her book in schools, and there are some school districts and classes that have been using it, and what that means for her and for the students. And yeah, I think that would be a really great addition
Mm-hmm.
to explore. So, as we all know, Overdue Finds strongly believes children should not have all the fun. What is one thing from elementary school that you think should be added to the adult work day? An example would be like recess or themed dress up days. Madeline, what do you think?
I would love. So on Halloween, this is kind of like a dress up day, but everyone would come to school. Like you'd have a normal day in the morning.
Yeah.
Everyone would go home and get their costume on. Then we would go back and there would be a parade through the gym with everybody's costumes. And it was just like a time. They would always play the Ghostbusters theme song and you would parade in your costumes around the gym. And then you would eat a bunch of candy. And then that was the end of the day. And I would love for Halloween to end that way. If we could just parade around the library, everybody's dressed up.
Yeah.
You get to show off all of your costumes, and then you eat a bunch of candy to close out the day. And I would that's the thing from elementary school that I think I miss the most.
Those days were fun. We didn't get to do a parade, but yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds really fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed Halloween, but I was a witch every year of my life. Like I wasn't that creative. I wasn't that engaged in making costumes. I was just the same thing every year. But I loved trick or treating. Like I loved all the stuff around Halloween and seeing other people's costumes.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I think maybe we should make a note. October is coming up, so
Yeah.
we have time to make this happen.
Yeah.
Bryce, what do you think?
So it's funny because I first thought of assemblies, but then I was like, that's just technically like a meeting. Like I liked assemblies as a kid, but now I'm like, Bryce, can you come to this meeting at 2:00? I'm just like, oh God. Like, no, I don't want to. So definitely not assemblies. But the one I thought of would be kind of fun, very similar to recess, is intramurals. So the idea of intramurals, like with recess, everybody kind of goes and does their own thing, maybe break off with like your friend or your friends or do your own thing. But intramurals, maybe you have like a department or a branch and you all get together for maybe 20 minutes and you either play a game or go do something else together. So I like the idea of intramurals. I think that'd be really good. Caroline, how about you?
Yeah, similarly, I went to like track and field day,
Oh
which is
yeah.
not something
Yeah.
I want to participate in. There's not a single event that I would do well in, but it's just a lot of fun. Your people are doing stuff. You need someone to keep track of like scorekeeping and records, and I think I could be involved there. We always had like hot dogs
Mhm.
there and like freezies, and everyone, has their sunscreen on and their neon ball caps. And I think yeah, just a track and field day of some kind.
Yeah, and ours would always be like, I think during like the last week of school. So it's
Yeah.
like this super fun day. Summer's just around the corner. Yeah,
Yeah.
those days were fun.
I also thought about like silent reading. Like remember when that was built into the
Oh
Mm.
day
yeah,
where
yeah.
everyone you would just like everyone would read. But that's just my like lunch break. So I guess I don't know. I don't know how fun that is. I thought I was expecting maybe book fairs as well, like the Scholastic
Mm.
Book Fair for adults. Sometimes you need a sparkly bookmark or a poster of a kitten in a teacup.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, Lamborghini poster. I'd always look for a book about UFOs or Bigfoot. It was great times.
yeah, if only we worked in a place that had, where we could find
If
books
yeah,
on different topics. Yeah.
we had after lunch every day in elementary school there was music appreciation, and they would play something, and there would be some activity you were supposed to do, like you would take a pencil and like draw the line of the melody, or maybe you would write like your feelings, and it was like a wide range of music. There was a lot of classical. There's a lot of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Like was pop, like that was used a bunch. Those are the ones that I remember the most. And that would be fun to do, like just to start off
Yeah.
every day. Someone could pick a song and everyone could respond to it. I think that would be fun.
People would be mad when it was my pick because it would be like, oh, Bryce is picking Huey Lewis on the news again.
Madeline, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so much fun. I really enjoyed the Outsiders talk, but all of it, really. Is there anything coming up at EPL that you would like listeners to know about?
Well, just generally at EPL, the final day of Summer Reading Club is Saturday, August 26th. So get all of your reading done and your ballots in so you can win those fun prizes. And at my branch, I'll just plug this. Jasper Place is starting some Sunday programming. So we have a Discovery Club every Sunday at 2:30. So it's for kids ages 6 to 8. It's all sorts of crafts and fun things that are science and technology related. And drop in. We hope to see you there.
A recent Discovery Club at the Capilano Library was doing Lego building, and then they built Lego self portraits. And
Fun.
that was pretty cool to see.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Bryce, you have a plug too?
I do, yeah. So I just want to let all Edmonton and area writers know that we're now accepting applications for 2 positions as writer in residence for 2024. So this is actually a 1-year position, and it's going to have you supporting aspiring writers in a wide variety of ways that include one-on-one consultations, workshops, and mentoring. So the position will also provide you the space and time to help you grow your own body of work. So maybe you'll be writing a book that kids will be reading in school. So we want our writer in residence to act as a living link between the library and the community to encourage the imagination of readers. The application process closes at midnight on September 17th, and all the information you need, including requirements and application details, can be found on our website at epl.ca/writer-in-residence.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you're subscribed to the show so that you get all of our new episodes. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And most importantly, tell a friend about the show. Maybe you can write it on a little note and then fold it up like really elaborately and then pass that note to your friend the way you maybe did in elementary school.
And then a good part of that too is maybe somebody sees you passing that note,
Yeah.
grabs it, and reads it aloud. So then even more people would then know to listen to the podcast.
Yes.
And it wouldn't be as embarrassing as it was back in the day if you had your own note taken and read in front of the class. So, but yeah, don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. And we'd love to hear from our listeners. You can email us at podcast@epl.ca. And both Caroline and myself get those emails. So, send us an email and let us know which books you loved and hated that you had to read when you were in school. You can also share your thoughts with us about the show on Twitter at epl.ca and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.